I wasn't supposed to notice her that way, she was my friend's mom. But the night she whispered, "Don't touch me again," I couldn't stop myself from replying, then stopped standing so close. That's when everything changed. I'd been going to my friend's house for years, and I'd never thought much about his mom beyond the way she always made sure we had snacks or asked if we needed anything. She was part of the background, like the framed photos on the wall or the scent of fresh coffee that always seemed to linger in the kitchen. But something shifted the summer I turned 23. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her, but suddenly, I noticed her differently. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that didn't try to be. She carried herself with the kind of ease that only comes from living long enough to know who you are. The fine lines around her eyes only made her smile warmer. Her hair, tied back in a loose knot, had strands falling free that caught the light when she moved. She didn't demand attention, but the room felt different when she was in it. The first time I really saw her was in the kitchen. My friend had run upstairs to grab something, and I was left standing there, leaning against the counter. She opened the fridge, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, clean, subtle, almost like fresh rain mixed with something floral. She turned, holding a pitcher of iced tea, and smiled at me. "Would you like some?" Her voice was steady, calm, but for some reason, it struck me differently that day. I nodded, a little too quickly, and she poured it into a glass. When she handed it to me, our fingers touched for just a second. A brush of skin, nothing more. But I felt it, sharp and electric, the way you feel a spark when your hand slips across metal. I looked up, wondering if she felt it too, but her face gave nothing away. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying not to think about that moment. But my mind betrayed me, circling back again and again. It wasn't just the touch, it was the realization that I wanted to understand her, to look past the role of my friend's mom, and see the woman she was when no one was watching. Over the next few weeks, little details stood out. The way she'd laugh softly at something on her phone when she thought no one noticed. How she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The faint crease between her brows when she was lost in thought. They were small things, ordinary things, but to me they felt enormous, as if each one was an invitation into a world I wasn't supposed to step into. And then there were the touches, small, accidental, but increasingly impossible to ignore. A brush of her hand when passing me a plate. Her shoulder brushing mine when we squeezed past each other in the hallway. Each time, my chest tightened, and I wondered if I was imagining it all. But it didn't feel imagined. It felt real. Still, there was guilt in every thought. She was older, experienced, someone who had lived through things I couldn't fully understand yet. And she was my friend's mother, the one person I should have kept at a safe distance. But distance was becoming harder to keep. That was the beginning of it, the moment the background shifted into focus. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't even expected it. But once I noticed her in that way, I couldn't unsee her. And I had no idea then just how complicated things would become. It's strange how ordinary moments start to feel heavier once you're aware of them. Before, I wouldn't have thought twice about being alone with her in the kitchen or passing by her in the hallway. But now, every time it happened, it was as if the space between us had grown smaller, the air thicker. One afternoon, my friend and I came back from basketball practice, and he headed upstairs to shower, leaving me downstairs. She was in the living room, struggling with a few grocery bags she just brought in from the car. Without thinking, I rushed forward to help. "Let me take those," I said, reaching for the heavier bags. She gave me that soft, almost teasing smile of hers. "You don't have to. You must be tired." I shook my head. "It's fine. Besides, you shouldn't be carrying all this by yourself." Her eyes lingered on mine for a beat too long before she turned toward the kitchen. I followed, the sound of paper bags crinkling between us. When I set them down on the counter, she leaned close to take out the fruit, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume again. It wasn't overwhelming, just enough to make me feel lightheaded, as if the room tilted slightly. "Thank you," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair back behind her ear. Her fingers grazed my arm briefly, almost absent-mindedly, but I felt it like a jolt. Moments like that kept happening. Not on purpose, at least not that I could tell, but enough to make me question everything. Like when I fixed the loose hinge on a cabinet door while she stood beside me, watching. She leaned closer to point out where it stuck, and I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. She didn't move away immediately, and neither did I. I tried to focus on the task, but my mind was anything but focused. My hands tightened around the screwdriver, my pulse racing louder than it should have. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "You're good at this. Handy to have around." The compliment was casual, but the way her voice dipped made it feel different, more personal. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to respond with a steady tone. "Just trying to be useful." Later, I caught myself replaying her words, the softness in them. I wondered if she meant anything by it, or if it was just my imagination twisting everything. What struck me most wasn't the touches or the closeness. It was the conversations that began to stretch beyond the surface. She'd asked me about my studies, my plans for the future, and she actually listened, her gaze steady, her expression thoughtful. When she shared little details about her own life, it felt like glimpses behind a curtain I wasn't supposed to pull back. She spoke of her work, her routines, the things she missed doing, the quietness of the house when my friend wasn't around. There was something almost vulnerable in those admissions, as though she didn't expect anyone to notice how much she kept inside. And I noticed everything. The soft sigh she let out when she thought no one was paying attention. The way her fingers tapped against the counter when she was lost in thought. The faint crease that appeared between her brows when something weighed on her mind. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that these were just normal interactions. But I couldn't ignore the way her presence drew me in, the way I found myself listening for the sound of her footsteps or watching for her smile. The house felt smaller each day, not because the walls were closing in, but because the space between us seemed to shrink whenever we were near each other. And though either of us said a word about it, the silence itself was starting to feel louder than anything else. It was bound to happen sooner or later. One of those small, accidental touches that couldn't be brushed off anymore. It started simply enough. She was reaching for a bowl in the kitchen cabinet, and I happened to be standing beside her. The space was narrow, the kind of closeness where every movement felt amplified. I stepped back to give her room, but as she turned, her hand brushed against mine. Not a fleeting touch this time, but enough to make my breath hitch. My fingers reacted before my mind could stop them, lingering for just half a second longer than they should have. Her eyes snapped to mine. A flash of something unguarded crossed her face, surprise, maybe even a flicker of the same electricity I felt, but then it vanished. She pulled her hand back as though the air itself had burned her. "Don't touch me again." Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it, but it trembled at the edges. It wasn't a scream, not even a raised tone. More like a whisper with steel behind it, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze, the shame flooding in fast. I wanted to apologize, to explain it away, to pretend it was nothing. But I couldn't lie to myself. It wasn't nothing. My voice caught, so I stopped. Any excuse I tried to form felt hollow. I just stood there, staring at the floor, heat rising to my face. She turned quickly, busying herself with the bowl as if she needed something, anything, to fill the silence. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. For someone who always carried herself with so much composure, the cracks were impossible to miss. I stepped back, giving her space. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave the room, but my feet stayed planted. I couldn't look at her, but I couldn't walk away either. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time. "You can't do that." It wasn't just a rule she was setting. It was a plea. A reminder. A boundary she needed, even if a part of her didn't want it. I finally forced myself to look up. Her eyes met mine for a split second before darting away. In that moment I saw it, the same confusion, the same pull, mirrored back at me. She wasn't untouched by this. She was fighting it just as hard. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. I didn't mean. I stopped again, realizing that wasn't true. I had meant it. Not to cross a line, not to disrespect her, but to stay in that touch just a moment longer, because it felt like the only honest thing between us. She shook her head quickly, shutting the moment down. It can't happen again, she said, her voice firmer now, though I could still hear the unsteadiness underneath. And then she walked past me, her shoulder brushing mine as she went. The contact was brief, but it felt deliberate, as though she was punishing herself for the words she'd just spoken. I stood there alone in the kitchen, the sound of her footsteps fading into the rest of the house. My hands clenched at my sides, my chest burning with the weight of it all. She had drawn the line. Clear. Unmistakable. But the way her voice trembled, the way her eyes had lingered just a moment too long, told me this wasn't over. I avoided her for a few days after that. Not deliberately, at least that's what I told myself, but every time I heard her voice from another room, I stayed where I was. Every time she passed by, I looked away. It felt safer that way, like distance could undo what had already happened. But the distance only made things heavier. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was loaded. And the more I tried to bury the memory of her words, "Don't touch me again," the more they echoed inside me. Not because of the rejection, but because of the way her voice had shaken. It happened late one evening. The house was quiet, my friend already asleep upstairs. I'd gone into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and she was there, standing by the window. The only light came from a lamp in the corner, soft and golden, making the room feel warmer than it should have. She turned when she heard me, her eyes catching mine for the first time in days. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally I broke it. "Are we just going to pretend nothing happened?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she'd been holding her breath. She looked away, focusing on the window instead of me. "It's better that way." I set the glass down harder than I meant to, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Better for who?" Her head snapped back toward me, eyes flashing, not with anger, but with something rawer, closer to pain. "For both of us," she said, her voice low. "You don't understand what this could mean. What people would think. What it would do." I took a step closer, careful but deliberate. "Then explain it to me. Because all I know is that you say one thing, but your eyes say something else." Her breath hitched, barely audible. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to build a shield. "You make me feel." She cut herself off, shaking her head. "I can't even admit it out loud." The vulnerability in her words cut through me. For the first time, I saw her not as unreachable, not as untouchable, but as human, lonely, conflicted, caught between what she wanted and what she believed she couldn't have. I closed the distance a little more, not touching, not daring, but close enough that I could see the way her pulse fluttered at her throat. "I never wanted to make this complicated for you," I said softly. "But I can't lie and pretend I don't feel it. Every time you're near, every time you look at me, it's there." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She shook her head again, though her body didn't move away. "This isn't fair. You're too young, too," I cut in, gently but firmly. "Don't reduce me to my age. I know what I feel. And I know you feel it too, even if you don't want to." For a heartbeat, the world went still. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She looked at me like she wanted to deny it, to push me away again. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, almost breaking, "You can't say things like that." I leaned in just slightly, close enough to catch the tremor in her breath. "Then stop looking at me like you're waiting for me to." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned quickly, breaking the moment, her hand pressing against the counter for support. "This can't go on," she said, though her voice had lost its strength. And then she left the room, the soft click of her footsteps disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that the line between us had thinned to nothing. We hadn't crossed it yet, but we were both standing on its edge. The house was quiet again, the kind of silence that made every sound feel magnified. I'd come by to drop something off for my friend, but he wasn't home yet. She was. She opened the door, her expression flickering between surprise and hesitation. "He's not here," she said softly, almost as if she hoped that would send me away. "I know," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "He told me he'd be late. I thought I'd wait." For a moment, she stood there, debating whether to let me in. Then, with the faintest sigh, she stepped aside. I walked past her, and even that small nearness sent my pulse racing. We ended up in the kitchen, the same place where so much had already happened between us. She moved to the counter, busied her hands with rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. I leaned against the opposite counter, watching her, the tension pressing down like weight in the air. "You shouldn't be here when he's not home," she said without looking at me. "Then why did you let me in?" Her hands stilled. She closed her eyes briefly, then set down the dish towel she'd been folding and finally turned toward me. The distance between us wasn't much, but it felt unbearable. "You make this harder than it already is," she whispered. I pushed away from the counter, taking a step closer, not enough to touch but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. "You think I don't feel the same? Every time I'm near you, I have to fight it. Fight wanting to be closer." Her chest rose and fell quickly, her lips parting as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she stepped forward, just enough to close the space by inches. Maybe she didn't even realize it, maybe it was instinct, but it was enough. I let out a shaky breath. Then stopped standing so close. The words came out softer than I expected, almost like a plea, but they hung in the air like a dare. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, unblinking. The silence stretched, heavy and alive. She didn't step back. She didn't move at all. I could feel her hesitation, the battle inside her, but also something else, the choice she wasn't making. I swallowed hard, my voice dropping. "If you really want me to stop, all you have to do is walk away." Still, she didn't move. Her hand twitched slightly at her side, like she wanted to reach for me but was forcing herself not to. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to close the gap, to take her hand, to show her what I couldn't put into words. But I stayed frozen, because I knew if I made that move, it would change everything forever. Her breath brushed against my skin, she was that close now. Her gaze flicked down for just a second, to my lips, then back up. The smallest motion, but it nearly undid me. Finally, she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't know what you're doing to me." I could have said the same. Instead, I let the silence answer for me. And then, just when it felt like the moment would shatter into something neither of us could take back, she stepped away. One step, then another, creating space that felt colder than it should have. She pressed a hand to her temple, turning her back to me. "We can't." Her voice was barely audible. "This can't happen." But the way her voice cracked, the way her shoulders trembled, told me the truth her words couldn't hide. It was happening. Whether either of us wanted to admit it or not, after that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had whispered, "You don't know what you're doing to me." It was the closest she had ever come to admitting what we both already knew. And even though she'd pulled back, the sound of her voice, the crack in it, kept echoing in my head. A few days later, it happened again, not the tension, but the closeness. My friend had gone out, leaving the two of us alone in the house. I was sitting in the living room when she walked in, carrying a folded blanket. She paused when she saw me, as if deciding whether to stay or retreat. But instead of leaving, she set the blanket down and sat in the chair across from me. For a while neither of us spoke. The quiet felt different this time, not sharp with tension but heavy with something unsaid. She shifted in her seat, her hands clasped in her lap, fingers fidgeting in a way that betrayed nerves I'd never seen in her before. Finally, she exhaled. "I shouldn't even be talking to you like this," she said softly, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Like what?" I asked. "Like you're more than you are." She gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "You're supposed to be just my son's friend. But I can't seem to keep it that way anymore. Her honesty stunned me. For weeks, I'd been reading between the lines, catching glances, interpreting silences. Now, she was saying it out loud, even if her voice trembled as she did. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said quietly. "I already know." She looked up then, her eyes glistening. Do you? Do you really? You don't know what it's like to feel like you're betraying yourself just for wanting something." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I know what it's like to want you even when I know I shouldn't. I know what it's like to think about you every time I leave this house. That feels like betrayal too." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she pressed a hand lightly against her chest, as though steadying the rhythm of her own heart. "I've been alone for a long time," she whispered. "Longer than anyone realizes. And I promised myself I wouldn't cross certain lines. That I'd keep control of myself, no matter what." There was a pause, then she added in a softer voice. "But you make me forget that promise." The room felt unbearably still. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to comfort her. But something in me held back. I knew if I touched her now, it wouldn't just be comfort. It would be crossing that line she was so desperately trying to hold. So instead, I let the silence speak. I stayed still, giving her space, letting her see that I wasn't going to push or force what she wasn't ready for. That restraint seemed to affect her more than anything else. Her eyes softened, her shoulders loosening as though she could finally breathe. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling as a small, sad smile touched her lips. "You're different," she said. "Most people, they'd take advantage of this. Of me. But you don't." I swallowed hard. "Because I don't want to take anything from you. I just want you to let me in." Her gaze lowered back to mine, steady now, though her voice was still fragile. "That's what scares me. Because I don't know if I can stop myself once I do." For the first time, she didn't walk away. She didn't set up a wall between us. She just sat there, open, vulnerable, and it felt like the most intimate moment we'd ever shared. And even though I hadn't touched her, I'd never felt closer. The days that followed felt different. Not because anything outwardly had changed. There were still no stolen kisses, no declarations. But because she had finally let her guard down. The memory of her voice whispering, "You make me forget that promise," lingered with me like a secret we now shared. It was late one evening when everything came to a quiet resolution. My friend had gone out again, leaving the house still and hushed. I was sitting at the dining table with a book open in front of me, though I wasn't reading. My thoughts kept drifting, restless and unfinished. She appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back loosely, a light sweater draped over her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching me as though deciding whether to cross the room. When she finally moved closer, her steps were unhurried, careful, but deliberate. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying an undertone I couldn't name. I shook my head, pushing the book aside. She sat across from me, folding her hands together on the table. The lamplight softened the lines of her face, highlighting the grace in her expression, but I noticed something else too, vulnerability, quiet but undeniable. For a while, we just sat in silence. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. It was ordinary, yet charged, like the world had slowed down just for us. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "About everything. About us." My chest tightened at the word us. I didn't move, afraid that even a breath would break the fragile moment. She continued, her voice low. "I don't know what this is supposed to be. I don't know if it even can be anything. But I do know that I feel different when you're around. And that scares me, but it also makes me feel alive in a way I haven't in a long time." Her honesty left me speechless for a moment. I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the table, closer to hers. "I don't need answers right now. I just need you to admit that you feel it too. That I'm not imagining this." Her eyes met mine then, steady, unflinching. Slowly, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. It wasn't much, just a touch, but it felt like everything. My hand turned, letting our palms meet, and she didn't pull away this time. Her skin was warm, soft, trembling faintly against mine. I held her hand gently, not gripping, just holding, as if even that simple act was too sacred to rush. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath that sounded almost like relief. When she opened them again, she smiled, a small, fragile smile that carried both fear and hope. "This can't be simple," she whispered. I returned the smile, my thumb brushing lightly against her knuckles. "I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking for real." Her hand squeezed mine lightly, a silent acknowledgement. She didn't make promises, didn't declare love, didn't try to define what lay ahead. But in that quiet moment, with her hand in mine, I knew we had crossed into something we couldn't go back from. Eventually she stood, her fingers slipping slowly from mine, the absence leaving a warmth behind. She leaned down, just slightly, and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It was quick, almost fleeting, but the gentleness of it said more than words could. When she pulled back, her eyes lingered on mine, her expression unreadable but tender. "We'll figure it out," she murmured. And then she walked away, leaving me sitting there with my cheeks still tingling, my heart beating faster than it should. We didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a question to fear. It felt like a possibility. Together but uncertain. 10L